Good morning and welcome to today's today's webinar, Annotative Scaling in AutoCAD. My name is Aldred Boyd. I'm an application engineer for Micrographics, and I'll be taking you through just how and why we would use annotative scaling when using the AutoCAD software. So just on the agenda for today, just going to do a little bit of an introduction and then just discuss why annotative scaling. Then we're going to take a look at what you can annotate and what styles are involved with annotating those objects. And then we're going to take a look at how to use annotate the commands, your objects, and your styles. So we're going to just take you through the different tool palettes that are involved with that and what we need to do to be able to get out our annotative objects in the end. And then just a quick summary of what we've discussed, and then just the conclusion of how I reckon that you could use this quite fittingly in your workflow at the office. Okay, so what is annotative scaling? Annotative scaling is the process in which you select a scale for drawing output. Okay, what does this mean? Whenever we do drawings, we'll take a look at how we need to make everything uniform. When we put out an engineering drawing, an architectural drawing, you don't want to see a whole lot of views or section views or top view, side view, front view, and then you see all your text and your dimensions at different font heights, and that's just, it looks messy, it's not very professional. So with annotative scaling, you can apply that to text, dimensions, multi-leaders, hatches, and blocks. And what this annotative scaling will do, it's a very intelligent scaling where it will basically say, okay, right, even though I've got all these different views, and I might have applied in model space the text and the font height is X, it all has to be a certain height when it comes to your paper space, and that's where the annotative scaling comes to. It'll be, no matter how sort of big you've created your text or your dimensions or your multi-leader height text, when it comes to putting it on your paper space and being able to print it, no matter what scale you've got, it will size the text or the object to the appropriate height so that everything looks uniform on that one piece of paper. Okay. So how did we get here? So traditionally what's happened is when you're working in AutoCAD, you will either annotate a dimension or put your text in model or paper space. And there's been a debate raging on for years and years and years on what's the best way to do it. Do you do it in model space, do it in paper space? And typically how this came along is that paper space didn't exist until about AutoCAD 14, I think. So until then, everything was done in model space, and a lot of companies, they kind of sort of came to they created their own workflows, sort of made AutoCAD work for them. And even back from those days, we're talking like 20, 25 years ago, those workflows still persist in certain companies. And even though AutoCAD and Autodesk did bring on new technologies or new ways to work with the software, people still use that sort of workflow that they've got. So typically what happens is in that workflow is that you create the AutoCAD geometry in model space 1:1, okay? And then what you do, because we've got this paper space we do all your annotations on, and because you might have a lot of different viewports, but you'll have the same text, but they've got to be at different scales, you'll create all your text or dimensions in model space. So that when you do create your viewports in paper space, be it 1:1, 1:5, 1:10, and you have to depict the same sort of text there. Like for instance, the tellers, on the right hand side of here, you'll see that the space is where the tellers are going to be in this bank. But in the big viewport, you've also got to depict the tellers has got to be in that space as well. And if you were creating that text in paper space, you'd have to do it twice. Whereas if you do it in model space, it's going to pop up in both viewports. Now, the great thing about this is that all the details and objects are in one space, so it's easier to manage, and it also allows for less rework. But the problem with this workflow is that you get variable text heights for the multiple scale factors. And as you can see on the right hand side over there, the tellers on the right hand side, the font height is much bigger than the tellers on the left hand side because it's at a different scale, and AutoCAD doesn't know how to deal with that, because everything in model space is 1:1. And when you go and scale it in a viewport in your paper space, it's going to have a different font height. So the way that sort of people have gotten away with this is that you would actually go and create, if there was sort of text that was the same, you'd create your text at different heights for the different scales in model space, and then just make it in your layers. You assign it to a different layer, and you just turn your layer on and off to be able to work with that. But that is quite tedious, and there is a lot of rework to be done in that. The second workflow that sort of companies get through with is, once again, you create all your AutoCAD geometry in 1:1 in model space. And then you create all your text or dimensions in paper space after creating your viewports. So what's going to happen is you're going to sort of create this text, and when you create your text style, you're going to say, right, this text style must be 5 millimeters. Whereas in the previous workflow, you'd actually have to say, look, I'm going to be printing this as 1:100, so the text has actually got to be, if I'm putting it in model space, it's got to be sort of 20 millimeters or 30 millimeters, whatever it is. So that is, once you've got your scales, there's no more guesswork, but it is a lot of rework, as we've said in the previous workflow. Now, the pros to having all your text or dimensions in paper space is that you do not have to worry about having to scale that text height up and down when it comes to this workflow. What you do have to do, though, is you're going to have to recreate and duplicate a lot of work over there. So you can see that by having the different viewports, if in the previous slide we had tellers in both views, you'd have to go and recreate that text in model space. So I'd actually have to type it out twice. Okay. So with annotative objects and styles, we can actually mitigate, we can kind of take those two workflows and sort of merge them together. So annotative objects and styles apply to text, dimensions, multi-leaders, blocks, and hatches. And with these as well, you will be creating everything in model space, as we'll see a little bit later, and then it will resize in your viewport when you create the scale. But there are a couple of little tips and tricks, or a couple of things you need to do in the workflow to be able to get it to do what you want to do. Okay. So just running through this, so the objects and styles we got is the text and text styles. And as you see, when you open up your text style, you'll see there on the front page, once you've created a new text style, is that you've got an option for annotative and your paper text height. Now you'll see that if I don't have my annotative on, that paper text height actually says model text height. Okay, so that is very, very important to remember. In the dimension and dimension styles box, you'll see over here that I've got under my fit tab, I've got the annotative. Okay, so that's got to be ticked for us to start the annotative command over there. So that's going to the text style. If you had created a dimension and it was not an annotative dimension or part of an annotative style, you do have in your properties this annotative option under miscellaneous, where you can say yes, it is annotative, and then you can start the workflow from there. Then in your multi-leader and multi-leader styles, okay, when you create your new your multi-leader style, you'll see there that I've got under my leader structure, under scale at the bottom there, I've got an option to make this annotative. For my blocks and attribute definitions, so what happens is when you create a block, the attribute definitions are allowed to be annotative as well. Okay, so your block and attributes can be annotative, and once you're creating that block definition, you'll see over there on the right hand side behavior, it must be annotative. Then in hatches, okay, so if you look at the, once you've created a hatch, obviously the hatch editor panel pops up, or the tab pops up, and on that panel, on the right hand side near to the closed hatch editor, you'll see there's an option to put annotative on. This annotative is off by default. Okay. And then, okay, so how do we go and create these styles and set up our text for that? Okay, so if we wanted to sort of, set up beforehand, we go through to our text style and we set up the dimensions, also the text style, sorry, that is going to go with this. sorry, my apologies, this is the dimension style. So in your dimension style, you create it, and then you've got a tick box there, annotative, right up front when you create that new one. And then just when you go into your dimension style, you can see there you've got your text height. Okay, so there's two options over there. Okay, so the commands, how do they work? So first of all, once we've set up all our styles, okay, so text styles over here, we want to now start creating text using that text style that we've made is annotative. Now, previously in one of the previous slides, you saw that with the teller, you saw that those two, the text was created in model space, but those two heights differed. So what's going to happen over here, the whole process for it is you create your text in model space, okay, and then select that text and you open up your properties. And with this, the text style will just be 1:1. That's the only thing that your annotation will actually be visible at. Because if you don't add annotation scales to that text object, once you create your viewport, it will not show there. And I've got a slide a little bit later which will show you that. So once you've opened up your properties, you'll see there's a little miscellaneous, and you're able to add your annotation scales. And over here, you'll see that by default, you just got it 1:1. Okay, and if I select on add, you'll see that I can add my scales to the object, and you can just go and either shift select or control select to add all the different scales that you're going to have this annotation at. Once you press on OK, it'll add it all over here. Now the right hand side, what I've done is I've added my viewports, okay, and you can see the size of the model is different. I think this is 1:1, 1:2, 1:4, but all the annotations, so the text is all the same. So this is annotative. You can actually see that all that text is the same height. Okay, so previously, if you didn't use annotation scale, if you wanted to get this effect, you've either got to scale up that text, so you're going to scale the text height up as you go through the different ones, or you have to go create it in model space. But once again there, you'll have to type in this is annotative 3 times in effect. At least you could copy it, but I mean, if you need to do it 10, 50, 100 times, that's a lot of copying. When it comes to dimensions, okay, the workflow is typically the same. So we go to our dimension style, you'll see over here, and give it a new name, and then you make it annotative, and then just go and put your text height in. Okay, so obviously it'll differ depending on the size of paper that you've got, being A3 versus A0. A0, you want your text height to be a little bit bigger so that you can actually see it once you've clearly once you've printed it out for yourself. Once you've created your dimension style, we're going to create dimension geometry. Okay, open up the properties palette with the dimension object selected, and then add all your scales as well. So it's the same process as your text. And then what we'll do is at the bottom right hand corner over there, and so this is just something you have to do with the text as well and any annotation objects, is that you'll see over there what your annotation scale is. So this method over here, if I had not come over here and added my scales to objects over here, and I still had 1:1, if I had to change the scale over here, I'd have to change it to see it. So over here, I think I've added 1:50. You come down over here, you change it because that would have said 1:1, and you'll notice that this will change over here. So the dimension will change just so. So yes, it does look very, very big over here, but it's just showing you how big it's going to be, or it's just showing you that it is increasing in size. So yes, so once you've created in your viewport and you've changed the viewport scale to 1:50, notice what it does over here. So it actually doesn't look as big as it does over here because the drawing, your drawing geometry hasn't changed in size. It's showing you that what you're doing is working, so that's why it's changed the size of that text, because it's got to increase it by that size so that when you go to your viewport in paper space, it looks it looks correct. So with hatching as well, so with hatching over here, same thing. You create your hatch and you select the annotative option on your ribbon, and then you go and hatch. Now what you can see over here, I've selected the hatch and I've added my annotation scales, and when I've gone to my paper space and created my viewports, you'll see there that the hatch looks the same, even though the different scales are there are different scales over there. I think it's 1 is to 100 and 1 is to 50. And then it just makes it look much more uniform, much better, much more professional, because if you've got hatch and the one's really, really small, the other one's really, really big, it does make your drawing look a bit messy. With your multi-leader, same process as above. So, so create your multi-leader style. You go through and you check that you've got all your different scales added. And then you create your viewports, and you'll see there that my multi-leader style is the same. So this text annotative has got the same height as that. Now, what I've shown on the bottom over here is that this text annotative exists in model space. So why doesn't it exist here in my viewport at the bottom? Is because I haven't added that scale to the viewport scale. Okay, so I haven't, the viewport over there has got a scale of X, and I have not added that to my list of scales that I need for my multi-leader. So what's going to happen over here is if I did wanted to see it, then I could add it there. But maybe it's one of the views that you do not want to see this text as annotative. So by taking that scale out of there, I am making sure that the text doesn't read where I don't want it to read. So there's two ways to do this. You can either have text where it is appropriate, and if there is a scale or a viewport with a scale that you don't want to see that particular text, you just leave it out and it will not show over there. Now, what we've done up to now is very sort of very manual. So every single time, you're going in, you're creating your style, then you're going in, you're creating your object, then you go to your properties, and then you go add all your different scales, and that's kind of sort of you have to have a lot of foresight for that. So with that foresight, it's like, okay, cool, I know there's going to be these many scales. So if you have got that type of workflow, then then it's a great workflow. But you have to do that for every single style that you sort of create. The other way to do it, you can do a little bit of automation over here, where you can use the auto scale function. Now at the bottom of your AutoCAD, you'll see there you've got three. Let's take a look. You've got three little objects over here. This 1, 2, and 3. So those are your annotation objects. And the first one is your annotation visibility. So do you see annotation visibility? And then the second one is your auto scale, and then your annotation scale. Now, if you do not see those three options, what you need to do is you go into the bottom right hand corner, and you'll see this little customization sort of button at the bottom right hand corner of your AutoCAD, and select that, and just make sure that when that sort of pop-up comes up, you have annotation visibility, auto scale, and annotation scale ticked. Okay, so once that's ticked, you'll see it in the bottom over there, and this allows us to automate the creation of what is visible at what scale. So with the annotation visibility, just make sure that it's blue so that you can see it. If it's blue, it's on. If it's not blue, then it's off, as in all the other sort of command helpers over here. And if it's on and you've chosen a couple of different scales, you'll see here this text is annotative. There's actually two there, okay, sort of superimposed over each other. And this is telling you that you have got a couple of different scales that sort of relates to this, and it's going to change if you have those two scales in your paper space. The second one is auto scale. So the first one, annotation visibility, is just to see if you've actually sort of added any scales to this. The second one is auto scale. Now, if I have by default it's off. If I have auto scale on, then what happens with this is, as I select different annotation scales, so the third one over here, as I select different annotation scales, if I've got my auto scale on, it will then just automatically add those scales to any annotation objects that I've already created. Okay, so that goes to multi-leaders, to text, to dimensions. So you can go and dimension, put your text on, put all your multi-leaders on for the entire drawing, all at scale 1:1. You put on auto scale, and then you say, okay, right, what am I actually going to have on this? Or you might have done it 1:1. You get to your 2D drawing and you think, oh, okay, now I want it to 1:5 or 10:1. And with this, you see, okay, my my annotation is not there, it won't be visible. So let's go back to the model space, select auto scale, change it to that 10:1 or 1:5, whichever one you've used in your paper space, and then it'll start populating all the annotations in the viewports that you've created. You've created in your paper space over there. Okay. So two different ways of doing it. You can either kind of automate it, so you're kind of creating all this annotation on the fly as you go along, or you've kind of pre-decided what you want to do and you want to go the properties route. So select your dimension, your text, your multi-leader, your hatch, go to your properties, go to where the miscellaneous little panel is in that properties palette, go to your annotation scale, and then change it or add the scale that you want for that, and going forward it'll then put it in for all your different annotation objects. So in summary, what can we use annotation scaling for? Text, dimensions, multi-leaders, hatching, and blocks. Okay. And how do we do that? So we create the annotative style, we create the annotative object, and then the one way is to open the properties palette to add the additional scales manually, or we can automatically add the scales with auto scale. Then we go to our paper space, set up your paper size, start putting in viewports and put in all the appropriate scales for those viewports. And then what you just need to do over there is just check and adjust, because some text might be really big and it might not be at the appropriate sort of positioning, and you might have text that's lying over, sort of critical geometry that you need to see. So just, go into that, just move the text to where you want it to be and just neaten up a bit. And once that's done, then you can go and do the rest of your project, or put the rest of your workflow in, and then go and print. So in conclusion, when using actually any sort of CAD software, have a think before you just start drawing. So analyze the design and the output that is needed. I would say that if you're just going to kind of do a drawing and just going to have a couple of pieces of text, instead of going through the whole process of setting up all these annotation objects and annotation sort of styles, just go and quickly put your text on in your paper space. You know that the text will be right. There's no fiddling with any scales that you've got to do. It's just there, it works. So something like that simple, that workflow I think would work just fine. If it's going to be a bit more complex, you've got maybe an A0 piece of paper, A1. There's a lot of different viewports on there with a lot of different scales. Take a look at utilizing this this annotation scale workflow. If you're going to have the same text, the same sort of dimensions on a whole lot of different viewports, because you need to see it there, then I would state do it over there. The one thing that is nice about having your dimensions in your model space is that when if you do move anything or size it up and down, it's much easier, it's much easier to get the dimension to move with it, because it does it automatically. I'm saying it's much easier, but that dimension line is actually so the dimension text is connected to that line. If you do it in your viewport, what happens is you'll notice if I move my viewport, if I change my scale, it doesn't automatically, it leaves the dimension sort of behind. There's I can't remember the command now, but there's a command to reattach all your dimensions to that. Okay, so yes, it can be done, but once again, there's a little bit more work. So if that's something that's gonna happen, you're gonna be changing your scales for the viewports quite a lot, before you get to the final design, or the design's still gonna change by the sizing. Then take a look at dimensioning everything in model space, and then creating your viewports, set everything to annotation scales, that if you do have your different scales for your different viewports, everything is there. Okay. Because once again, as I said, once of text can be done in paper space. And if you haven't started using annotation scales to present, try test it. There's nothing to lose. It's something that Autodesk has worked on. I think it's been around since AutoCAD 2008. And you might find that you are able to increase your work and sort of the output that you're getting through, where as we all know, drawing is about 30% of your time on a project. A lot of time, I would say 60-70% is is detailing. There's a lot of detailing to be done. It does take a lot of time, and by using the annotation scaling and the annotation objects, you can hopefully bring that down so we can get more projects in and make the clients happy with earlier due dates. So you've got a project, it's for November, you get it done in October. Fantastic. Okay, and basically that is that. Thank you very much for watching. My email address was in the front page. This is our general one as well. Our website to see what else we can do. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Cheers, bye.